it's time for me to do another Poképasta, and this time it's about the alpha version of what was called at the time Pocket Monsters. Until the ending, this story could be plausible. I mean, there could have been someone who was venting their anger and hatred at Game Freak and Nintendo due to being overworked on production of the game and wanted to get their message out by putting it into some Pokemon games. What is a bit silly is that at the end, the creator put in random images to scare the reader, when in reality, he could just be doing a shitty streamer video or something. And yeah, it seems unlikely that this person could have sneaked down to a Pokemon game, but then again, it was just in the alpha version, so maybe Nintendo caught on. Pokemon started development in 1990 as Capsule Monsters. It began as a series of concept art designed by Satoshi Tajiri, inspired by his childhood years, during which he enjoyed bug collecting. During the same year, he proposed the idea of Capsule Monsters to Nintendo, where it was rejected, but the creator of Mario and Zelda, Shigeru Miyamoto, kept interest in the project. However, Tajiri had trouble trademarking the name Capsule Monsters, so he changed it to Capumon and then Pocket Monsters. According to some concept art, you were originally going to be able to purchase monsters from a pet store-like setting. Capsule Monsters was scheduled to be released in the summer of 1991, but due to there not being enough funds to continue development, Capsule Monsters was put on hold in early 1992. During this time, 80% of the music was already completed, and Game Freak Inc. later developed Yoshi for the NES and Game Boy. Due to the success of the game, in 1993, they put a poll within the company as to whether or not they should complete the Pokemon games. They were still called Capsule Monsters, by the way. Most of the votes were cast for finishing development, and in the summer of 1994, what was originally called Capsule Monsters turned to Pokemon, and the game resumed development. Why am I telling you this? Well, I'll tell you why. Recently, I received a box packed with Pokemon games, merchandise, manga, and basically anything related to Pokemon as a donation that was mailed to my home a few weeks ago. Among these items were copies of Pokemon Red and Green. They were essentially the original Japanese versions of the game, except there was a note which explained to me, or any receiver of the box, that these copies were the early alpha and beta versions of the games that the writers received in a contest in 1995. Neat, I said, as I took a Japanese Game Boy, inserted the Pokemon Green cartridge, and launched the game. I was met with a bland placeholder title screen with black text reading, Pokemon Alpha version .10. Do not copy or redistribute. After I read the black Japanese text, I studied Japanese at school, mind you. I pressed the start button and I was given the traditional Professor Oak introduction. He introduced me to the world of Pokemon, asked me to tell my characters and his grandson's name. I always chuckle at how he always forgot his grandson's name. However, after I typed my characters and his grandson's name in, the screen froze. When I noticed this, I reached for the reset button, but before I could, I began to hear a quiet ticking sound. It was like an 8-bit version of a clock. After approximately 5 ticks, a message suddenly appeared on the screen. Ugh, my head hurts. The screen then cut to my bedroom. It had a different design, and when I walked downstairs, I noticed the house had varied greatly in size and design. It was this big mansion with science equipment, pixelated pieces of paper strewn about the 8-bit floor, and a scientist making what looked like pixelated garbles. This is my house. I live here with my adopted brother called Joe, who is my rival. My dad is currently making breakfast. He is also a researcher and scientist who studies Pokemon, but my head still hurts. I looked at the message. The repeated capitalization of the word hurts was very unusual, but I didn't think much of it. I talked to my rival, but he gave me silence, but not in text form. I mean, he couldn't even be interacted with. Literally, he had no collision detection or anything at all. He was just a flat, non-interchangeable sprite with no sense of life at all. I walked up to Dad, but he only gave me the answer of, "Go get a Pokemon from Professor Oak." I made my character walk outside and walk into a patch where I presumed wild Pokemon were located. Instead, I was facing a white screen where a message appeared. The message read, "Do you want to face it?" I was then presented with the options of yes and no. I selected yes without even thinking about it, and I was then teleported to Mount Moon. It was completely deserted. No trainer battles, no wild Pokemon encounters, nothing. I traversed the rocky boundaries, and when I walked to where the location of the ladder at floor 1 would normally be, I found a pixelated pedestrian. I interacted with the pedestrian, and I was without warning thrown into a Pokemon battle. I panicked, and my trainer character threw a Pokeball containing a Pokemon I didn't even have before. It was Kingdra, even though Kingdra didn't exist prior to Generation 2. Inserting the hex value for Kingdra by cheat device or messing with the original game's memory and making it a main Pokemon would simply give you missing no. I thought that was neat that Kingdra was originally in the game at one point in development, but they cut it out due to lack of memory or something. My opponent was not even a Pokemon at all. It was this humanoid creature with bony spines on its back and some sort of plague doctor massacre sign. I was freaking out at this point, so I tried to defeat the creature as fast as I could, but then I realized that the creature stopped attacking me. I couldn't attack it, or even use the option to run. It just stared at me for a couple of seconds before it spoke to me. Not in text form, no. This was an actual voice speaking to me. I thought I was going crazy at this point. It was destroyed, probably because of the Game Boy sound chip, but I managed to make it out. Hello. The reason that I'm speaking to you is because I have left this message as a coded-in event. You can hear me because you have activated a sequence of events. You weren't originally going to hear this, but I've added this in as a little protest to Game Freak and Nintendo. They made us work, because one of the leaders of this Pokemon project, I almost had multiple cardiac arrests, and I had many accidents because of this project. Also, to Game Freak, Nintendo, and the player, by the end of this message, you'll get a little surprise. Thanks, Mr. Hayashi. The screen then went black. I thought that this whole event was over, but when I saw a series of terrifying images flash on the screen, I knew that this wasn't over. I saw people getting buried alive. I saw a close-up view of a giant spider eating the dismembered hand of a person. As image after image flashed by, glitch music emanated from the speakers before the game reset itself. I was relieved, glad that those images had stopped, but when I looked at the title screen, I saw something different. The title text now read, Pocket Monsters Green. It somehow changed back to the original game, except the trainer sprite was missing. Instead, the rival sprite was in its place.